Our ship vanishes into a wall of thick gray fog, its wooden hull groaning against an unseen sea. The world shrinks to a cold, wet blanket of mist, with no land in sight and no stars above. How did medieval explorers possibly cross thousands of miles of treacherous ocean without any of our modern technology? Their secret was not magic, but a brilliant collection of tools crafted from wood, brass, and human ingenuity. You are about to discover the 25 essential instruments that guided knights, merchants, and legendary adventurers across the globe. By the end of this, you will know exactly how sailors defied the empty horizon to map the unknown. We will uncover how a simple magnetized rock could point the way to new worlds, and what mysterious crystal might have guided Vikings through the gloom. What forgotten piece of human cleverness do you think made the biggest difference between being lost forever and finding a new shore? That first and most vital tool was a masterpiece of brass and precision, the mariner's astrolabe. Its weight felt solid and certain in a sailor's hands, a stark contrast to the unpredictable heaving of the deck beneath his feet. This was not a tool for guesswork. It was a device for capturing the heavens. A sailor would hold it by a ring at its top, letting it hang perfectly vertical. He would then line up the rotating sighting bar, called the alidade, with the sun at noon or a known star at night. By reading the degree markings on the main plate, the mater, he could measure the exact angle of that celestial body above the horizon. This number, this single point of data snatched from the sky, was the key to unlocking his position on the vast, featureless ocean. It told him his latitude, how far north or south he had traveled. The heart of the astrolabe was its intricate web of pointers known as the rete. This delicate brass fretwork was a map of the most important stars, rotating over plates engraved with coordinates for different latitudes. Using it required immense skill, especially when trying to steady the heavy instrument against the wind and waves. Its story begins not on the turbulent Atlantic, but in the calm scholarly centers of the ancient world. Greek astronomers first conceived of such an instrument, but it was medieval Islamic scholars who refined it into a powerful navigational tool. They perfected its mathematics, added detailed star maps, and wrote extensive manuals on its use. This transfer of knowledge into European hands turned the astrolabe into a true cornerstone of exploration, a literal star chart held in the palm of your hand. Can you picture the focus required to stand on a slippery deck, the cold metal in your grasp, waiting for that one moment of stillness to take a reading that could save your entire voyage? This was the delicate art of finding your way by the stars, but capturing the sun with a heavy brass astrolabe was a difficult art on a moving ship. This challenge gave rise to a far simpler, yet brilliantly effective, tool. The cross staff was little more than a long, square staff of wood with a single sliding crosspiece. A navigator would hold one end of the main staff to his eye, then slide the crosspiece back and forth. He would position it so the lower end seemed to touch the horizon line, while the upper end lined up precisely with the sun or the North Star. By reading the markings on the staff where the crosspiece settled, he could calculate the celestial body's altitude. It was a direct, almost intuitive way to measure the angle between sea and sky. While less complex than the astrolabe, the cross staff had a distinct advantage in rough weather. Its lightweight wooden construction was easier to steady against the roll of the waves, and a sailor could take a reading more quickly before the ship pitched again. This very practicality made it a workhorse instrument during the great age of discovery. Legendary explorers like Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama relied on its straightforward readings to guide their ships across entire oceans. They trusted this simple piece of carved wood to give them the numbers that kept their crews on course, week after week, heading toward lands they had only dreamed of. What other simple inventions could hold such power to shape the course of history, all from aligning a stick with the horizon? Yet even the cross staff had a dangerous flaw. To measure the sun, a sailor had to stare directly into its blinding glare, a practice that could damage his eyesight over years at sea. The solution was an ingenious tool that turned its back on the problem, quite literally. The backstaff, later known as the Davis Quadrant, revolutionized celestial navigation by letting a sailor measure the sun's altitude without ever looking at it. Instead of facing the sun, the navigator stood with his back to it. He would hold the instrument and adjust a movable vane on a curved scale, called the arc, until the vane's shadow fell perfectly across a sighting slit at the far end. This alignment revealed the sun's precise height above the horizon. It was an active measurement performed entirely through the study of shadows. This method offered a profound improvement in both comfort and safety, protecting the navigator's vision from the harsh light he depended upon. The backstaff represented more than just a new gadget. It was a fundamental shift in thinking. It proved that the most elegant solutions often come from approaching a problem from a completely different angle, or in this case, by turning your back to it entirely. This clever device became a trusted companion for countless sailors, allowing them to gather the vital data they needed while preserving their most precious sensory tool, their own sight. How many other world-changing innovations were born not from confronting a challenge head-on, but from finding a wiser, safer path around it? While the backstaff protected a sailor's eyes from the sun, another tool gave them a constant sense of direction, even when the sky was completely hidden. The magnetic compass was arguably the most transformative invention in the history of navigation. Its principle was deceptively simple. A magnetized needle floating on water or pivoting on a pin would always align itself with the Earth's own magnetic field, pointing steadily toward the north. This was not a tool for measuring the stars. It was a tool for finding a path through total darkness and impenetrable fog. Its quiet, unwavering needle provided a fixed reference point when every other landmark had vanished. This brilliant device did not originate in the shipyards of Europe, but in the workshops of ancient China, where it was first used for land surveying and spiritual geomancy. The knowledge traveled slowly westward along trade routes, reaching the Mediterranean world by the late medieval period. European sailors, initially skeptical of its almost magical properties, quickly recognized its incredible power. For the first time, a captain could maintain a steady course away from the sight of land, confident he knew his heading regardless of the weather. This single invention fundamentally changed the nature of sea travel. It shifted the paradigm from cautious coastal hugging, where sailors never let the shoreline out of their sight, to bold open ocean voyages across thousands of miles of deep water. The compass unlocked the true age of exploration, making journeys across the Atlantic and around the Cape of Good Hope not just possible, but repeatable and reliable. It turned the vast, terrifying emptiness of the sea into a charted highway. Can you grasp the sheer psychological freedom that little floating needle provided? The confidence to sail into the complete unknown, trusting a force you could not see to guide you home. But a steady compass bearing was only part of the equation for a ship far from land. Knowing the hour of the night was just as critical, a task nearly impossible without the sun. This is where a beautifully simple device, the nocturnal, came into its own. It was a navigator's personal night clock, a circular calculator made of wood or brass that measured time by the slow wheeling of the stars around the celestial pole. Its design was a set of concentric discs. The largest outer disc represented the days of the year. A second, smaller disc was marked with the hours. And a central pointer, called the rule or alidade, was used to sight the stars. The entire mechanism was held together with a central pin, allowing the discs to rotate independently. To use it, a sailor would first align the current date on the outer calendar disc with a specific marking. Then, holding the instrument upright, he would sight the North Star through the hole in the center. Finally, he would swing the central pointer until it lined up with two specific guard stars in either Ursa Major, the Great Bear, or Cassiopeia, the famous W-shaped constellation. Where the tip of that pointer fell on the inner hour disc revealed the local time. This was not clock time, but true sidereal time, measured by the actual rotation of the heavens. This knowledge was priceless. By comparing the local time, found with the nocturnal, with the time at a known port of departure, kept on a sandglass or a crude mechanical clock, a navigator could estimate how far east or west he had traveled. It was one of the only methods available to even guess at longitude while in the middle of an ocean. The nocturnal transformed the entire night sky into a giant, predictable clock face, and gave sailors a fighting chance to know not just where they were, but when they were in the vast, dark expanse of their journey. Yet for all their celestial calculations and timekeeping, a ship's position was ultimately a story of constant motion, a tale told in leagues traveled and compass headings held. This story was recorded not in a logbook, but on a clever wooden device called the traverse board. Its design was the essence of practical simplicity, a circular piece of wood marked with the 32 points of the compass rose. From the center, 8 lines radiated outward, each line drilled with a series of holes. A set of pegs connected by a string was its only moving part. Its purpose was to systematically log the ship's estimated speed and direction over a set period, typically the time it took a half-hour sandglass to empty. Every half hour, the crew on duty would note the ship's current compass heading. They would then take a peg and insert it into the next available hole on the corresponding compass point line on the board. At the same time, the ship's speed was estimated by casting a log chip and line into the water, a process we will explore later. The speed, measured in knots, was also recorded by placing pegs into holes on a separate set of lines. By the end of a 4-hour watch, the traverse board would be studded with pegs, creating a perfect visual record of the entire watch's journey. It showed precisely how long the ship had sailed on each heading and at what speed. This was the heart of dead reckoning. The navigator would then collect this data, translating the pattern of pegs into a calculated position on his chart. He would start from his last known point and, using simple math, plot a course made good, estimating his new location based solely on the direction and distance he believed he had traveled. It was an educated guess, a continuous thread of logic stretched across a blank and featureless sea. The traverse board made the invisible path of the ship suddenly visible and tangible. Can you see the ship's boy, his hands cold and salty, carefully pushing another peg into the board as the sand runs out, each tiny piece of wood, a testament to another half-hour of progress into the unknown. Out in the open ocean, a ship navigated by the stars, but as land drew near, a different kind of knowledge became vital. The lead line was the mariner's guide through the hidden dangers of the coast. It was a tool of profound simplicity, a long, carefully marked rope with a heavy lead weight attached to one end. When a ship approached a strange shoreline or navigated a tricky channel, a sailor called the leadsman would take his position on deck. He would swing the line in a wide circle and heave the lead weight forward into the water, ahead of the ship's path. As the ship sailed over the spot, the line would go taut, and the leadsman would read the depth from the markings on the rope, calling it out in a rhythmic chant. By the mark 7, he might shout, meaning 7 fathoms of water lay beneath the keel. This constant sounding was the only way to avoid running aground on an unseen sandbar or a jagged reef. But the lead line was more than just a depth finder. The bottom of the lead weight was cleverly hollowed out, a small cup filled with tallow, a sticky animal fat. When the weight hit the seabed, sand, mud, tiny shells, or pebbles would stick to the tallow. As the leadsman hauled the line back aboard, the ship's master would examine this sample like a treasure map. The texture and color of the seabed were unique clues. Sailing along a familiar coast, a master might know that the bottom changed from dark mud to coarse sand just before a safe harbor entrance, or that a specific type of white shell meant a dangerous shoal was near. This simple act of bringing up a piece of the ocean floor transformed a blind measurement into a powerful form of identification. Can you hear the leadsman's chant echoing across the water, each number a reassurance, each sample from the deep a piece of the puzzle that was their location? The rhythmic chant of the leadsman gave you the depth, but another voice on deck called out the ship's very pulse, its speed. This was the job of the chip log, the ocean's first true speedometer. Far from a complex machine, it was an exercise in elegant simplicity. A sailor would heave a small, triangular piece of wood, the chip, over the stern. This chip was designed to stay relatively still in the water, acting as a floating reference point. Attached to it was a long, thin line, the log line, with knots tied at very precise intervals. As the ship sailed away from the stationary chip, the line would pay out rapidly over the rail. Another crewman would hold the reel while a third watched a special sandglass, typically designed to run for about 30 seconds. His only job was to count how many knots slipped through his fingers before the sand ran out. That number, the count of knots, was the ship's speed. If 5 knots passed in 30 seconds, the ship was moving at 5 knots. This is the direct origin of the term we still use for nautical speed today. Every piece of this system was calibrated. The distance between the knots and the duration of the sandglass worked in perfect harmony to translate a physical action into a vital number. This number, the ship's speed, was the final, critical piece of data for the traverse board. Without it, the navigator's dead reckoning was just a direction, a heading leading into emptiness. With it, that heading gained substance and distance. He could now calculate how many leagues they had traveled on each course, plotting a new estimated position on his chart with every watch. Can you feel the urgency of that 30-second count? The entire ship's progress distilled into the silent fall of sand and the steady slip of rope through a sailor's weathered hands. That steady count of knots relied on a silent, flowing heart of time, the sandglass. More than just a timer, this simple device of 2 glass bulbs connected by a narrow neck was the essential rhythm keeper of the entire ship. Its constant, silent trickle of fine sand from one chamber to the other governed everything from the most critical navigation to the daily lives of every soul on board. A ship carried a whole family of them, each sized for a specific purpose. The smallest, a half-minute glass, was the partner to the chip log, its brief flow measuring the ship's speed. The most common was the 30-minute glass, used to time the sailors' watches, its turning marked by the ringing of the ship's bell. And the largest, the massive 4-hour glass, was the master clock for the entire voyage, its slow, deliberate emptying marking the official change from one watch to the next. This orchestration of time was not about convenience, it was about survival. In a world without landmarks, the predictable turn of the glass imposed order onto chaos. It told the navigator when to check his traverse board, when to take a new celestial sighting, and when to expect a change in the crew on duty. The ritual of turning the glass the moment it emptied was a sacred duty, a small act of control over the vast, indifferent ocean. Can you sense the weight of that responsibility? The constant, quiet reminder that every half hour of progress, every moment of safety, was measured out in a stream of falling sand. While the sandglass measured time, the ship's progress was ultimately drawn on a map, but not the kind you might expect. These were Portolan charts, and they were not drawn for kings in palaces, but for sailors on the deck. Imagine a map crafted entirely from lived experience, where every curve of the coastline was a memory of a safe harbor or a near disaster. These charts were stunningly practical works of art, drawn on vellum, the durable skin of a sheep or goat, to withstand the rigors of a sea voyage. Their most striking feature was a web of lines crisscrossing the entire page. These were room lines, radiating out from multiple compass roses drawn at key points on the map. A sailor would take his compass, note his heading, and then find the corresponding room line on the chart. By simply following that straight line across the parchment, he could plot a direct course from one known port to the next. The coastlines themselves were rendered in meticulous detail, every bay, headland, and river mouth carefully recorded. The names of ports and landmarks were written not horizontally, but perpendicular to the shore, as if rising up from the water itself to greet the approaching mariner. This was not geography as a science, it was geography as a story, written by the countless captains and pilots who had sailed those waters before. The Portolan chart was a collective memory of the sea, a tangible record of which paths were safe and which led to ruin. Can you see the navigator, his fingers tracing a room line from Lisbon to the Azores, his entire journey laid out before him in a web of ink and intuition? While the astrolabe was a masterpiece of brass, its simpler cousin, the quadrant, offered a more direct path to the stars. Picture a quarter circle of wood or brass, marked with a scale from 0 to 90 degrees along its curved edge. From the right angle hung a weighted string, the plumb bob, and along one straight edge were 2 small sighting pins. Its operation was beautifully straightforward. A sailor would hold the quadrant vertically and peer through the 2 sights, aligning them perfectly with a single bright star, most often the North Star. As he held it steady, the weighted plumb line would hang freely, unaffected by the ship's motion. The point where the string crossed the graduated scale on the curved edge gave him the star's altitude above the horizon in degrees. This single number was a direct line to his latitude. Its small size was both a blessing and a curse. It was portable and far less expensive than a full astrolabe, making it an ideal backup instrument for any navigator's kit. Yet that same compact frame made it less precise than its larger counterparts, as a tiny error in sighting could result in a significant error in the reading. Despite this limitation, the quadrant's value was immense. On a night when a complex astrolabe might be too difficult to manage on a pitching deck, this uncomplicated piece of wood or metal could still deliver the essential date a sailor needed to stay on course. In the hands of a skilled navigator, it was a humble but trustworthy key to the heavens. How many safe landings were secured not by the most advanced tool, but by the reliable simplicity of a weighted string and a carved arc. While the quadrant used a weighted string, another tool from a different sea turned the sailor's own body into the instrument. The camel was the secret of Arab navigators who mastered the monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean. Its design was the height of elegant simplicity, a small rectangular wooden board, no larger than a man's palm, with a single string threaded through its center. That string was its true genius, marked with a series of carefully placed knots, each one representing a specific latitude along a well-traveled route. To use it, a sailor would hold one end of the string in his teeth, positioning the knot for his destination right at his lips. He would then extend his arm, moving the camel board closer or farther away until its lower edge seemed to touch the horizon line and its upper edge precisely framed the North Star. When the star was perfectly cradled between the wood and the sea, he knew he was on the correct latitude for his journey. Each knot on that string was a direct memory of a port, a tangible point in a vast ocean. A sailor traveling from East Africa to India would start with one knot at his lips, and as he sailed north, he would progress to the next knot, and then the next, following this stellar ladder across the water. This was not a tool for complex calculation, but for perfect repetition, allowing generations of sailors to find the same invisible highways their fathers and grandfathers had sailed. Can you feel the intimacy of that act? A single man on a dark deck, his own outstretched arm and a knotted cord connecting him to a star, guiding him unerringly toward a distant market or home. Those knotted strings and wooden boards guided sailors under clear night skies. But what happened when the sun itself vanished behind a solid blanket of gray? For the legendary Vikings sailing the harsh North Atlantic, this was a daily threat. Their sagas speak of a mysterious tool, a sunstone, a crystal that could reveal the hidden sun. This was not a myth, but a potential application of pure physics. The theory points to a specific type of crystal known as Iceland spar, a transparent form of calcite. When you hold this crystal up to the sky, even on a completely overcast day, a remarkable thing happens. The crystal polarizes the scattered light, and by rotating it, you will see two faint, shadowy images of the sun. When these two images merge into one, becoming equally bright, the crystal's axis is pointing directly toward the sun's hidden position. It was a way to see the unseen, to find a celestial reference point when the entire world was nothing but uniform gray light. The debate among historians and archaeologists has been fierce for decades. Did the Vikings truly use this method, or is it just a romantic interpretation of their tales? Then, in 2013, a compelling clue was found aboard a British shipwreck from the 1500s. Amid the wreckage lay a small, cloudy piece of calcite crystal. Its position on the ship suggested it was not mere cargo, but a part of the navigator's toolkit, used centuries after the Viking Age had ended. Modern experiments have proven the method's startling accuracy, with test sailors using a replica sunstone to determine the sun's position within a few degrees, even in thick twilight or fog. This crystal bridges the gap between legend and science, a tangible piece of mineral that could have guided the most daring sailors through the world's most treacherous fogs. Was this the Vikings' true secret, a natural GPS hidden inside a seemingly ordinary stone? That mysterious sunstone crystal could reveal a hidden sun, but another stone held an even greater secret, a force that pulled at metal itself. This was the lodestone, a naturally magnetic piece of the mineral magnetite. Before the compass was a polished instrument, It was this raw, unassuming rock. Its power felt like pure magic to a medieval mind. A navigator would take a simple iron needle and carefully, deliberately, stroke it against the lodestone, always in the same direction. With each pass, the invisible power within the stone transferred into the metal, awakening it, making it magnetic. This was the moment of creation, the birth of a compass needle from an ordinary sliver of iron. The newly magnetized needle was then placed on a tiny raft, a piece of straw or a sliver of cork, and set afloat in a bowl of still water. Freed from friction, the needle would tremble, then slowly, inevitably, swing to align itself with the Earth's own magnetic field, one end pointing steadfastly north. This humble ritual transformed a piece of common ore into the most important tool in the navigator's chest. The lodestone itself was often treated with a kind of reverence, wrapped in silk or stored in a special carved box, for it was seen not just as a tool, but as a key to a fundamental mystery of the world. It was the living heart of the compass, the primal source that gave every other navigational calculation its foundational direction. Without this strange, attractive rock, the concept of a reliable magnetic north might have remained a curiosity, never becoming the guiding star for entire fleets. Can you sense the awe of that first person who watched a metal needle, touched by a stone, persistently seek a direction no one could see? But that magnetic needle and the astrolabe in your hands were only as good as the knowledge in your head. A navigator could measure the angle of the sun perfectly, but if he did not know precisely where the sun was supposed to be in the sky on that exact day, his reading was just a meaningless number. This is where the power of the written word truly took to the seas, in the form of astronomical tables. These were not maps of the land, but maps of time itself, massive books filled with columns of numbers predicting the future positions of the sun, moon, and planets for years to come. Among the most famous were the Alphonsine tables, commissioned by a Spanish king in the 13th century. Imagine a navigator in his cabin, the ship rocking around him, opening a heavy, leather-bound volume. He would find the current date, and the tables would tell him the sun's exact declination, its position north or south of the celestial equator, for that very noon. With this crucial piece of information, his astrolabe reading transformed, he would take the altitude he measured from the deck, combine it with the sun's declination from the book, and through a straightforward calculation, arrive at his latitude. The tables did the impossibly complex mathematics in advance, turning a problem that would stump a genius into a simple lookup task for a working sailor. This partnership between instrument and information was revolutionary. The astrolabe captured the sky in the moment, while the tables provided the eternal context, the cosmic clockwork against which that moment was measured. Can you see the navigator, his finger tracing down a column of printed numbers, connecting his lonely, wet observation on the deck to the organized wisdom of astronomers hundreds of miles away? This was the birth of precision on the open ocean. Yet for all the mathematical precision of the tables, a different kind of knowledge was whispered among pilots in crowded port taverns. This was the pilot's handbook, often called a rudder, a word borrowed from the French term for a road guide, a routier. If the Portolan chart was the map, the rudder was the instruction manual, filled not with numbers, but with stories. These handwritten books were treasure troves of lived experience, compiling generations of local knowledge about a specific coastline. They described everything a captain needed to know that a map could never show. A rudder would detail the precise turn of the tide in a narrow strait, the strength and direction of hidden currents, and the best anchorages to wait out a sudden squall. It told you which headland looked like a sleeping giant from the sea, and which river mouth was safe to enter only on a rising tide. The most vital information was often encoded in easy-to-remember rhymes and proverbs. A pilot navigating the treacherous sandbanks of the English Channel might recite a verse passed down from his father, something like, "When the white church holds the evening sun, steer for the western bar, not the eastern one." This was a direct instruction, linking a specific landmark at a specific time of day to a life or death navigational decision. These books were fiercely guarded trade secrets, copied and amended by hand, their margins filled with new notes from each voyage. They transformed a dangerous, unknown coastline into a familiar path, because someone else had already paid the price to learn its secrets. Can you feel the weight of that trust? A young pilot reading the faded ink of a master. His own journey guided by the collective memory of every ship that had sailed safely home before him. Even the lead line had its limits in the tightest corners of the sea. When a ship crept into a shallow estuary or navigated the winding, unpredictable channels of a great river, there was no room for the long, sweeping heave of the weighted rope. In these confined spaces, the sounding rod came into its own. This was navigation stripped to its absolute essentials, a long, rigid pole, often marked with depth measurements, thrust directly into the water by a sailor leaning over the rail. There was no waiting for a weight to hit bottom, no chant to call out, just the immediate, physical feedback of the pole striking the seabed. The sailor would feel the jarring impact through his hands and read the depth directly from the waterline against the markings on the wood. Its simplicity was its greatest strength, offering a rapid, continuous series of depth checks as the ship moved cautiously forward. This made the sounding rod an indispensable tool for coastal traders, fishermen, and any vessel operating in the deceptive waters of a home port, where familiarity could breed complacency and a single submerged rock could spell disaster. It was the nautical equivalent of a blind person's cane, tapping a quick, rhythmic path through an invisible landscape. Can you feel the urgency of that repeated thrust into the murky water? Each solid contact with the bottom a small victory against the ever-present threat of the unseen. Even with the magnetic compass pointing the way, a wise navigator always had a plan for when its magic failed. The bearing dial was that plan, a simple wooden sundial designed not for telling time, but for finding direction. It was a backup system powered purely by the sun, a reassuringly physical object when the floating needle felt like an untrustworthy spirit. At its heart was a vertical pin called the gnomon, the part that casts the shadow. The dial itself was marked with the cardinal directions, but unlike a simple garden sundial, this one was cleverly adjustable. Its base plate could be tilted, calibrated for the specific latitude of your voyage. This adjustment was vital, as the sun's path across the sky changes dramatically the farther you travel from the equator. Without this calibration, the shadow it cast would point in the wrong direction, leading you astray instead of toward safety. To use it, a sailor would simply set the dial level, ensure its latitude setting was correct, and then observe the shadow of the gnomon as it fell across the face of the instrument. The tip of that dark, sharp line would indicate an approximate cardinal direction. It was not as precise as a compass, and it was utterly useless under cloud cover or at night, but on a clear day, it offered a second opinion from the heavens themselves. Can you see the navigator, holding the wooden disc up to the midday sun, watching the shadow slowly shift, confirming for his own peace of mind that yes, they were still heading east, just as the compass said, or perhaps discovering a terrifying and crucial error? In a world of uncertainty, this was a way to ask the sky for a second chance. That elaborate web of lines on the Portolan chart radiated from a central piece of art, the wind rose. More than just a decoration, this intricate circular diagram was the soul of the chart, a visual encyclopedia of the winds themselves. Its design evolved over centuries, starting with 8 primary directions, then expanding to 16, and finally to the 32 points we recognize on a modern compass rose. Each point was not just a direction, it was a named wind with its own personality and reputation. A sailor would speak of sailing with the tramontana, a cold, powerful wind blowing from the north, or fighting against the sirocco, a dusty, oppressive gust arriving from the Sahara. These names transformed abstract directions into tangible forces of nature. By studying the wind rose, a navigator could understand the prevailing patterns of the sea he was about to cross. He knew which winds were his allies, capable of filling his sails for weeks on end, and which were his adversaries, to be avoided at all costs. This knowledge was not just academic. It was the difference between a swift, profitable voyage and a long, desperate struggle against the elements. The wind rose encoded generations of meteorological wisdom into a single, beautiful symbol, allowing a captain to read the personality of the air as clearly as he read the shape of the coast. Can you hear the old sailors in a Genos tavern, debating the character of the Grecale or the Leipzio, their entire understanding of the Mediterranean distilled into those 32 named points? All those scattered pieces of data, from the traverse board's pegs to the chip log's count, found their final home in one essential volume, the captain's logbook. This was not merely a diary, it was the ship's official memory, a daily ledger that transformed fleeting observations into a permanent record of the voyage. Each day, the captain or pilot would carefully inscribe the ship's estimated position, painstakingly calculated from the day's dead reckoning. He would note the prevailing wind direction and strength, the ship's speed measured by the log, and any celestial sightings taken with the astrolabe or quadrant. But the logbook captured more than just numbers. It held the story of the journey itself, recording sightings of whales, shifts in the water's color, the sudden appearance of land birds, and the first taste of fresh water from a river mouth still days away. This continuous narrative was a powerful tool for self-correction. By comparing his dead reckoning position with a true position obtained later from a celestial sighting, a sharp captain could understand the ocean's hidden influences, the subtle currents that had pushed his ship off course without his knowledge. This allowed him to adjust his sailing strategy, to better predict the push of the water on his return trip. And when the voyage was over, these logbooks became the raw material for history. Chart makers would gather them, comparing dozens of accounts from different ships to correct the coastlines on their portolans and to add new dangers or safe passages. The logbook was a gift to the future, a shared memory that made every journey, whether a triumphant discovery or a near disaster, a lesson for the sailors who would follow. Can you see the captain in his cabin, the single candle flickering as his quill scratches across the page, each word a stitch in the fabric of a map that did not yet exist? The captain's logbook held the story of the voyage, but the complex celestial dance behind that story was often learned from a far more intricate device kept safely on land. The armillary sphere was a universe in miniature, a breathtaking sculpture of interlocking metal rings representing the great circles of the heavens. Its name comes from the Latin word for bracelet, and that is precisely what it looked like, a collection of ornate bracelets nested one inside the other. A central ball stood for the Earth, surrounded by rings for the celestial equator, the ecliptic path of the Sun, and the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. This was not a tool for a storm-tossed deck. It was a master teacher, a calculator used by scholars and skilled navigators to visualize the cosmos and plan their journeys before a single sail was raised. By rotating the rings to match a specific date and time, a person could see exactly which constellations would be visible that night and where the sun would be at noon. It turned the abstract mathematics of the astronomical tables into a physical, movable model, allowing a navigator to practice his craft and understand the principles that guided his simpler instruments at sea. Holding an armillary sphere was to hold the mechanics of the sky in your hands, a profound reminder that the stars moved in a predictable, beautiful order, even when the ocean seemed pure chaos. If the astrolabe was a sailor's star chart, the armillary sphere was the master blueprint from which all those charts were derived. Can you see the aspiring pilot, tracing the polished brass rings by candlelight, committing the paths of the stars to memory long before he would ever need to find them from a heaving deck? That same principle of rotating rings to unlock cosmic secrets also existed in a far more portable, personal form. The Volvel was a paper universe, a delicate and beautiful instrument found tucked into the pages of an astronomer's book or a rich captain's almanac. It was a series of layered parchment discs, carefully cut and attached to the page with a threaded string, allowing each disc to spin independently. These were the analog computers of their day, designed to solve specific problems of time, tide, and the movement of the moon. A sailor could turn the discs to input the date, and the Volvel would output the predicted time of the next high tide in a major port, or show the phase of the moon on a given night. This was vital information, as tides could dictate the timing of a harbor departure by hours, and moonlight could mean the difference between a safe coastal passage and a dangerous one. The Volvel represented a perfect marriage of art and science, often hand-painted with zodiac signs, lunar faces, and elegant script. It put immense calculating power directly into the user's fingertips, transforming a multi-step mathematical process into a simple turn of the wrist. While too fragile for the daily grind of shipboard life, it was a powerful planning tool, a pocket-sized planetarium that allowed a navigator to carry a piece of the armillary sphere's wisdom with him, ready to consult before making a crucial decision. In an age before digital displays, this was interactive knowledge, a silent, spinning oracle made of paper and ink. The sea's rhythm is not just in its waves, but in its great, breathing tides. That predictable rise and fall could be a harbor's welcoming gate or its impassable wall, and knowing its schedule was a matter of survival. This knowledge was recorded in tide tables, meticulously compiled lists that predicted the time and height of high and low water for specific ports and headlands. A captain approaching a river mouth with a shallow bar knew he might have to wait for the precise hour when the rising tide lifted his ship's heavy hull, just enough to clear the dangerous silt below. Arrive too early, and he would be stuck, a helpless target for wind and weather. Arrive too late, and the ebbing current could turn against him, making entry impossible. These tables were the product of patient, generations-long observation, often kept by monastic houses on the coast who recorded the tidal clock as faithfully as they recorded the hours of prayer. They translated the moon's silent, gravitational pull into a practical timetable for commerce and exploration, allowing a ship to synchronize its arrival with the very heartbeat of the coast it sought. Can you feel the tension of that waiting? The entire crew watching the waterline on the rocks, trusting a table of numbers to tell them the exact moment the sea would grant them passage. But a sailor's world was ruled by more than just tides. He needed to know the saint's day for a festival in a foreign port, the phase of the moon for a night passage, and the sun's declination for his noon sight. Carrying a library was impossible, so he carried a single, essential volume, the Nautical Almanac. This was the ultimate all-in-one reference, a dense compilation of celestial data, calendar information, and accumulated weather wisdom. Its pages held the astronomical tables that gave meaning to his astrolabe readings, but they also listed religious feast days, which governed market schedules and port activities across Christendom and the Muslim world. Sprinkled throughout were rhymes and proverbs about the weather, the accumulated lore of 1,000 voyages. Red sky at night, sailor's delight, was not just a saying, it was a data point. The almanac was a bridge between the sacred and the scientific, the celestial and the practical. It connected the navigator calculating the angle of Polaris to the merchant planning his sails around the feast of St. Nicholas. This single book, often stained with salt water and thumbed through by anxious fingers, contained the entire known rhythm of the maritime world, a captain's personal key to understanding time, tide, and the turning of the heavens above his fragile wooden ship. Each of these tools was a stepping stone, a clever answer to a problem that would inspire an even better solution. The cross staff, for all its utility, was refined into the safer, more precise backstaff. The fundamental principles captured in the heavy brass astrolabe and the simple wooden quadrant were not forgotten, but honed over generations. Navigators and instrument makers tirelessly worked to improve accuracy and ease of use on the unstable platform of a ship. This long evolution of celestial measurement culminated in the 18th century with two revolutionary devices. First came the octant, which used a system of mirrors to bring two objects, like the horizon and a star, into perfect alignment, a huge leap in precision. Then, from the octant's design, emerged the ultimate expression of this ancient craft, the sextant. With its wider, 60-degree arc, the sextant could measure the angles between the moon and stars, solving the elusive puzzle of longitude at sea. Every wooden camel, every weighted quadrant string, every careful reading from a brass astrolabe was part of a centuries-long conversation that finally produced this master instrument. The sextant was the final, brilliant word in a story written by countless sailors who dared to measure the sky. Yet the most vital tool on any ship was not made of brass or wood, but of flesh and bone. All the measurements from the astrolabe and the compass were filtered through the navigator's own honed intuition, a deep, almost subconscious connection to the sea and sky. An experienced sailor could read the world around him like a living map. He noted the sudden shift in the water's color from deep ocean blue to the pale green of a coastal current, a sign that land was near even when it lay far below the horizon. He watched the birds with a hunter's eye. A lone seabird circling high meant little. But a steady stream of birds, flying purposefully in one direction at dusk, was a powerful clue. They were heading toward their roosts on land, and by following their line of flight, a ship could find an island it could not yet see. The types of seaweed drifting past the hole told their own story. Long, broad-leafed kelp might indicate a rocky shore nearby, while a tangled mass of sargassum spoke of open ocean eddies. Even the clouds were a text to be read. A fixed, stationary cloud on an otherwise clear horizon could mark the location of a high, volcanic island, its peak condensing the moist air into a permanent cap. This was knowledge that could not be written in a book or etched on an instrument. It was a sensory library built from a lifetime of watching, waiting, and remembering. The tools gave him numbers, but his own senses gave him context. A sudden drop in the swell, a change in the wind's smell, the specific chill of a current, these were the subtle clues that confirmed or contradicted his dead reckoning. The greatest navigators were not just calculators. They were naturalists and poets of the ocean's moods, understanding that the truest compass was their own accumulated wisdom, tested against the endless, shifting sea. Can you feel the confidence of that master mariner, standing on the bow, tasting the salt air and knowing, in his very bones, which way to turn the helm? That quiet confidence, built from both instrument and intuition, is the true legacy of these 25 essential tools. Each one, from the humble tallow-filled lead line to the intricate brass astrolabe, was a testament to human ingenuity in the face of the vast and terrifying unknown. They were not used in isolation, but as parts of a greater whole, a diverse toolkit that allowed a single wooden ship to become a vessel of discovery. The compass provided an unshakable sense of direction. The astrolabe and quadrant fixed your place on the globe, and the chip log and traverse board plotted your path across the featureless blue. This collective brilliance did more than just prevent ships from running aground. It enabled an entire age. It forged the trade routes that brought silks and spices to Europe, connected distant cultures that had never known each other, and mapped coastlines that had existed only in myth. These tools were the quiet enablers of empires and the humble bridges between worlds. So the next time you look at a map of the globe, picture yourself not as a viewer, but as a participant. Stand on the deck of a creaking carrack, the salt spray on your face and the wind in the sails. Feel the weight of an astrolabe in your hands as you search for the sun, or watch the steady swing of the compass needle, pointing the way to a continent no one from your world has ever seen. You are not just learning about history, you are touching the very instruments that shaped it. Of all these incredible devices, from the mysterious sunstone to the knotted camel, which one captures your imagination the most? Let us know in the comments which tool you would have trusted to guide you into the unknown.